So yes, thank you very much. As I said, my name's Don Weldon, and we're going to be talking about Dash, or interactive data visualizations without JavaScript. Or kind of an alternative title for this presentation, I think, would be what you can, can't, should, and also probably shouldn't do with Dash, which is a library from Plotly. And so over the course of this talk, I want to kind of explore a little bit about why you might want to use Dash, and then kind of give a very basic introduction to it, not a in-depth sort of deep dive tutorial, because obviously that's what the documentation is for. But I do want to also discuss a bit, kind of provide some introductory examples, and then discuss some of the things that we've learned at my company, Decision Lab, from using Dash across different teams. And also, if you're interested in some of the points that I kind of talk about later on, and want to get more involved in Dash, or have any kind of advice or interesting points to discuss, please do come and approach me. I'll be at the conference today, and also at the drinks this evening. I should also, just before we continue, add a very quick disclaimer. That disclaimer is that, I'm not an expert on the Dash project. I'm not an author in this particular library or anything like that. This really is a talk about my personal experience and the experience of my company using Dash, rather than kind of a sales pitch for it from the open source community. So you might ask, if I'm not an expert, why am I here? And also, more to the point, my background is as a full stack developer. I'm a JavaScript developer. I work in Python, and for my sins, I used to work in PHP as well. It's a bit weird to be using to be using Python to write JavaScript. And so kind of I want to explain how it is that I kind of came to be using Dash on a regular basis at work. And so I work for this company, Decision Lab. We're a mathematical modelling consultancy based in central London, in the UK. And I should just say very quickly before we carry on, if you are following the latest in the Brexit debacle, I'm sorry. I haven't got a clue what's going on either, and it really is not good. But it's lovely. I should also want to say thank you to the organisers of this conference and to everyone who's come here from all over Europe. Events like this across different countries and within the whole of Europe are really quite special, and so more of this, less of that, please. Anyway, so Decision Lab, we are, as I said, a mathematical modelling consultancy. We have expertise in machine learning, kind of data science, optimization, and simulation. We work mostly in defence and engineering, intelligence, public bodies, various other kind of different markets, and we're a small company, and our primary interest is in unusual bits of data, interesting problems, and things that we haven't necessarily done before. One of our kind of main selling points as well is that we don't just take someone's data and write a report. We build tools using data. And some of these tools, for example, this was a project recently where we took satellite imagery and then analysed it to look for deforestation, to detect illegal gold mining in the Amazonian rainforest, providing tools to the Colombian government. And at the moment, we're also deploying on board these things here. This is our deployment environment. Forget AWS, forget Azure. We're deploying on a Type 45 destroyer for the Royal Navy with a predictive maintenance system based on neural network machine learning. But so obviously we're a company of data scientists and people like myself, software engineers as well. But one of the kind of problems or things that we notice is definitely this kind of two cultures to Python. And I'm sure in fact, it's evident in this conference today. This is a joint conference between PyConDE Germany and PyData Berlin. You can see there's a sort of like data scientist sort of ecosystem in Python, and there's also the kind of software engineer sort of ecosystem, maybe focusing on the web or sort of MicroPython and other kind of frameworks. And so it's not quite as bad as the kind of CS Snow essay with the two cultures and the arts and humanities back in the 1950s and so on. But there is definitely, in my opinion, that kind of, those sort of two cultures and two sort of backgrounds to your typical person working in Python. And they have different priorities and different approaches, say, and it's really important that these two kind of communities collaborate with one another. Hence why everyone's here today, right? But generally, if you're working to a deadline and something on something that might be commercially sensitive as well, you actually kind of want to minimize often the number of new technologies that, say, a data scientist has to learn, or this might be someone who's just recently joined your company or just like fresh out of their PhD or something. You want to minimize the new like non-data technologies that they need to learn in order to be able to take a project on. Because I really want my data scientists to be taking a lead, developing like a proof of concept or an alpha, talking to a client and, doing interesting things with data. But their background probably isn't in web development, and it's probably not really what excites them or what they kind of like come into work for in the morning. And so that's how we discovered Dash. And this is the project by Plotly. And the kind of the selling point is that this is a team of data scientists or people who make data science tools that allow you to build websites using pure Python and not having to learn JavaScript. It's an open source project, and there are some paid kind of consultancy options as well that you can use. And it's quite a young project, but it did recently hit version 1, I think in June, which was a big deal in the kind of the Dash community. So, the kind of selling point of Dash, like I said, is that it allows you to build an interactive website without having to use JavaScript. And that's a good thing sometimes, but not always. And so in the rest of this talk, what I want to go over is just explain how Dash works, fundamentally what it does, give some examples of what you can do really quickly with Dash, and also discuss some of the kind of, like I said before, the tips and good practices that we've kind of learned as a company. But I'll also cover this point here, which is when you want to stop using Dash and build a more involved or like a proper sort of website, and some of the kind of considerations that you might want to think about when you're deciding to start a project in Dash. So, first things first, pip install Dash. It's very, very straightforward. You can simply install it via pip and then use it as a standard kind of Python script. A hello world example is up here. So if we have a look here, we're importing these two libraries, Dash and Dash HTML components, which I'll discuss in a sec. You create an app just like you might do if you're familiar with Flask, and actually under the hood, Dash here is creating a Flask application for you. You define a layout, and so here we've got a very simple layout, just one div or division tag, and then we've got a heading tag in there as well, which is just going to have some text in it, and then we literally just run that script or run that server. And now this is where I have to think across different web browsers, I'm afraid. But if you bear with me, you can see very, very simply that we have created a Dash application that's the equivalent of our hello world. And that is actually generated using that code. I've put a little logo on there using some fancy CSS because there's a default, Dash will look for a CSS file for you by default. And we've got it running up on my laptop now. And actually there is a GitHub repository on my GitHub. So just go to github.weldon and you can find these repositories that have all of the code examples that I'm using today, plus some more, and you can run them in a little Docker container, and it just opens up all the different examples on different ports. So that's our hello world, and sorry, I'm going to have to squeeze this over here, and then, right. So that's our hello world, but that's not an interactive web page, is it? But we'll come to exactly how to make it interactive in just a moment. Under the hood, or what Dash is doing for us, is basically just two libraries that talk to one another. And so one of those libraries is this Dash HTML components, which we imported up at the top before. And that is just a wrapper around lots of different React components, which we'll come to in a sec. And so this is just a Python wrapper around a React component, which itself is wrapping an HTML tag. And so this library allows us to kind of define HTML layouts using just Python. And then there's the actual Dash application, which manages the relationships between these particular components, and it serves the application for us locally or on our server, wherever we want, using Flask. Like I said before, though, the hello world script that just displays some HTML for us isn't particularly interesting. We want to have interactive web pages that allow our users to kind of do something a bit beyond reading just some text. And so, before I explain how this works and show an example in Dash, I thought it'd probably be quite useful, especially for people who might not have a background in web development, to explain how this would work in plain old JavaScript. So, first off, we're going to have to define a layout and write some HTML. And here we create some DOM nodes. And I should say as well, just at the top here, this isn't DOM as in me. I'm a web developer that happens to be called DOM. DOM actually stands for the Document Object Model. So this isn't vanity when I start talking about the DOM. This is just the lingo, I'm afraid. So we create these three DOM nodes up here. As you can see, we've got this paragraph tag, this span, and this input. And the way that we would kind of represent this as a tree is here we've just got a paragraph, and then the span, you can see that's there, the span with a particular ID that's denoted by that hashtag there, and likewise the input there that's denoted by that ID. And basically all I want to do is create a script that, rather than saying hello world or hello Berlin, whatever, allows a user to type their name in and it will say hello to that particular user. And so what I need to do is take the value that's put into that input, so that's a text field there, and then set it as the HTML that's going to be inside of my span. But rather than doing that just once when the page loads, say, I need to write a JavaScript application that's going to do that continually. And so whenever it changes, it's going to update the DOM and do something to make sure that the page is up to date. And so the two technologies that are involved here, the main one is JavaScript, which allows us to manipulate me or manipulate the DOM. And then React, which is a JavaScript library that allows us to, rather than write a full JavaScript application and code in pure JavaScript and implement everything ourselves, React allows us to do this declaratively. So we just define what we want to happen, and then React takes care of the rest for us. And so ultimately, the piece of code which is going to say hello to our particular user and display it in the front end and put it in that span is going to be a bit of JavaScript that looks something like this. The exact syntax here isn't especially important, but the important point is that there's going to be some JavaScript that runs inside a user's browser that updates the DOM for us and kind of implements the behavior that we want. Meanwhile, though, if we start looking at how to do this inside of Dash, Dash is a Python library, and all of the logic that we write and all of the code that comes to Dash, or that we put in Dash, is Python code. And so the interactions between our different DOM elements, or the different Dash components that we put inside of our app, are going to be written in Python, and that Python is going to live on our server. And so that means that every time any input changes, or we have any kind of interactivity on the front end of our website, we're going to have to make a call back to the server where our Python script lives and run something there. So we're constantly crossing a network to have these sort of interactive web pages. So if we take a very brief example here, we rewrite the JavaScript app that we've just discussed and we put it into Dash here. So you can see I'm just defining that layout again using the Dash HTML components. The input component, though, so that's our text box, is actually belongs to a third library called Dash Core Components that we have to import as well. So we've got our input here, and then I'm creating this callback. And that's literally just a Python callable, so usually a function, and I'm defining the output and the input to this function. So whenever any of these inputs change, this function is going to be called, and it's going to create some output here. And the output of this particular function, so what it's returning, in this case a string, is going to come and live inside of this h1 up here. And it's going to, as I say, it's going to run any time that this particular input here changes. So it's a little bit like an Excel field or something, where you kind of, you're making a reference to some other cell, and whenever you update that cell, then other cells related to it in the kind of the formula are going to update as well. And so now if we, let me pull this web browser over, I'm afraid. And we now go to our second example. So here you can see I'm running this app locally now. I've set up this sort of interactive example. And now if I want to, without dropping that pointer, I could type style6. And you can see that here Dash has created an interactive web page for us. We've written everything using Python. There's no JavaScript at all, but we've suddenly got an interactive web page that we can start to play with. Sorry, this is Google Slides, never as slick as you want. So, as I said before, every change, though, that's going to happen on that website, or every time that I pushed a key on my laptop just then to change the text that's in that heading, my browser made a call to the server, which in this case is also on my laptop, but if it was on the internet, it would be over a bigger network, for example, to run that piece of Python that's just that very basic string interpolation there, using the kind of F-string syntax that was new in 3.6. And this causes a huge sort of performance loss. And actually, I have to say in Berlin, I'm not sure that this really carries much weight anymore, because I tried one of those electric scooters last night, and they're really, really powerful. So actually, yes, I'm not sure which is React and which is Dash here, but there's a huge performance loss in terms of the kind of interactivity of your web page. But that's generally okay. I'm building a really basic sort of proof of concept app here, and I want it to be made by a data scientist. It's not going to be a huge production load application. It might be for, 10, 20, 100 users in a kind of specialist area. People who are looking at, particular data sets or want to have some results from a machine learning model, say. It doesn't have to be super, super performant, in the way that, Airbnb, say, might be. So it's good. And my data scientist can take the lead and, really start to build things with it. And so if you want to think about what can you actually do in Dash, how far can you go? Well, the answer is very far, actually. The Dash is, like I say, in its name, it's geared towards building dashboards above anything else. But you can actually add some really quite interesting sort of transactional kind of activities, or build transactional web pages, which I'll show in a minute as well. And so just to give a kind of very brief whirlwind tour of some of the different different functions of Dash and features of what you can do. I'm going to show 3 examples. One is just going to be listing essentially a data frame, but making it interactive. Another one is going to display a graph, because obviously Plotly are very well known for plotting. And then thirdly, we're going to explain what I mean by this kind of transactional approach or transactional request before. And like I say, all of the examples are in this GitHub repository here. So if you want to take a look in more detail, then head over there. So first off, the displaying a data frame. I took the Titanic data set. So this is the list of all of the passengers on the Titanic. And you can see here, this might look like quite a lot of code, but actually it's just a lot of it's the way it's formatted. So we have this data table here, which you can see. And then I've created this drop down as well. So this is just my layout. I've got a data table and a drop down, and I've got this callback, which just filters my, the data that goes into my data table based on the value of that particular drop down. And so now if we come back to our previous example, you can see here I've got the data set that was in my data frame, and this is all using Python. There's no JavaScript involved here. And if I wanted to show, say, just the female passengers, so I filter on sex, you can see here I've got a list of just the female passengers rather than the male. And likewise, if I want to go to all sexes, you can see I can update that. And all of this is happening just in Python. There's no JavaScript involved here. No one's had to learn any new front-end technologies. You could do this in a Python notebook if you wanted to. There's no kind of special web thing here. It's just a data science library. So if I just move this back. Moving on, and so you can see here this callback with the decorator. That's what makes it interactive. A graph, that's often one of the things that we really need to present in a data science report of some kind. And again, it might look like a lot of code, but again, it's how it's formatted. There's this Dash core component, and they actually have lots of different types of graph built in. In this case, I'm just building a histogram. I've split up my data set, so I'm displaying the number of, or the frequency of passengers on board the Titanic by the first letter of their first name. Which was a fun little list comprehension to write if you take a look inside of that GitHub repository. And so here I'm literally just defining, I'm going to have a graph, here's my data, putting some labels on and all that kind of thing. And then again, I hit run, and again, you could do this in a GPython notebook really quite easily. And you can see I've got a web page now with a full, histogram just displayed using pure Python. And I could make that interactive. I could put all sorts of other, different interactions and, kind of build up a lot of complexity in my React application or in my Dash application. And then finally, this transactional example. And this is something that I think is really powerful if you start using Dash a lot inside of your company, because rather than just displaying information on the web page, often you want to have the ability to change that information, maybe to leave a comment or to, if you're classifying images, say you want to say yes or no, is this an example of deforestation or not? And so here, I'm creating a very classic web development tutorial, which is a to-do list. So here I've just got an unordered list that I'm going to populate with my tasks. I've got this input, which is going to take some text from the user. And I've got a button here, so that every time that button's clicked, I want to do something. And so then I define a callback. Here I'm mimicking having a database, say. So in this example, I've just literally put a list inside of memory, and I've got this function that will give me a list of list items here. So this is an HTML tag. And then this callback, again, the important thing here is that whenever that button's clicked, so buttons have a property which is the number of times they've been clicked. So whenever that goes up, this code here is going to run, and I'm pulling out the value from my input, so my text field, and then I'm able to add that or append that to my list of tasks. And so again, let me move this over. You can see, do list. To-do list. So we could add any task we want in here. Boom. And we've created just a very basic to-do application there. And the important thing is that, this is loaded inside of memory, but if I were to refresh the page now, for example, it's still there because I haven't shut down my server, and you could put that into a database like a MongoDB or a SQL database or something like that. And you can actually start to create interactive tools where you don't just display data, but you actually, you're able to edit it as well, or to make changes to your state. You can also build your own Dash components. So if you are a JavaScript developer, or you have one on your team and you want to extend the functionality of Dash in a particular direction that isn't covered yet, you can create your own component and use it however you want. But as a slight criticism of that, I would say that the actual API here is slightly limited, and access to some advanced JavaScript features like being able to use Redux, for example, is complicated at best sometimes. But that being said, you can actually go very, very far with Dash. And an example from a project we used recently, this is actually a slightly older iteration of this project, but this is a machine learning tool. So in the back end here, there's a whole machine learning pipeline that takes images from satellites and looks for deforestation, and then decides on each instance of that deforestation, how likely is it that it's down to illegal mining, which we're trying to detect for the Colombian government. And this is a tool that's used by law enforcement, and so kind of on a trial basis for a particular algorithm. And you can see we've got all sorts of thresholds and filters, and they can approve or approve or reject particular hypotheses and so on. This isn't like a really slick sort of web application necessarily, like Facebook or Google or something. But it was built by two data scientists with no web experience over the course of a couple of months as they were iterating on their model. And so when we want to kind of take this further and actually take it up to another TRL or kind of deploy it as a bigger tool, we'll obviously change this around. But in order for rapid prototyping on small teams, this was a brilliant project for us, in that we were really able to advance things very, very quickly here. And the only slightly complicated part of this was the mapping component here, which we built in-house and looking to open source as well. So just some final parting tips for when you start to build larger Dash applications. The tips are really the same as building any larger software project or larger data science project, and that is to kind of religiously organize your code, split your callbacks and your layouts into different files, say, and start to run things as modules, and really kind of think about the logic and the organization of your code. So a typical Dash example we have here, and this isn't covered in the Dash documentation, but more of a convention that we've developed at Decision Lab. We'll have for every particular component or layout or route that we build inside of Dash, we have the callbacks and a layouts file, and then these are kind of hierarchical and nested. We've also begun developing a internal framework for Dash. And so moving away from just writing single Dash scripts to actually kind of declaratively defining our routes and our particular endpoints in Dash and the callables that we want to use. And that allows us to, for example, automate loading data frames and implement things like dependency injections. So if you want a connection to a database, we provide the data scientist with a connection to the database rather than have to worry about connection strings and secret handling and all that kind of thing inside of a data science project. And so if this is something that you think might be interesting, then please let us know, because we are looking to open source this in the future, and we are always looking for volunteers to kind of help and provide details to that particular framework. But just before we finish, I think a really important thing to discuss is actually when you want to stop using Dash and start building like a more advanced or a more involved, I use inverted commas here, proper web application. And so just to kind of summarize, Dash is really good for rapid UI development by non-specialists. Data scientists can get an application up and running without specialist knowledge really, really quickly. And the applications they build are actually very informed as well. They don't have to hand over work to, say, a software engineer or a front-end developer who doesn't necessarily isn't as interested in the data science aspect as they are in the kind of the UI development aspect. But at the same time, Dash presents quite a few problems because it's really rapid UI development by non-specialists. And so if you're going to start a project that you think might eventually lead to building a production web application, maybe you should get a JavaScript engineer on board really quickly, because otherwise you're going to create some technical debt. If you're eventually going to have to build something in JavaScript, sometimes biting the bullet is better than, continuing down the line. And likewise, this idea that UI development is informed, well, you have to ask who's informing it. It might be very informed by a data scientist, but actually, would you not be better doing a lot of user research here and getting some UX consultants in to see what's the tool that you actually want to build and how are your users going to be using it in the end? And also what you can do in Dash using these components is, of course, somewhat limited as well. So Dash is a great tool for facilitating rapid development, especially with data-driven dashboard interfaces and so on. Actually investing a little bit of time into it and getting on board with it as a company, say, really can allow you to go very, very far and produce some really, really cool tools. But I'd say the take-home message is that actually front-end developers will still have a job. Dash is not here to replace that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe we have time for one or two questions. So,
thank you for your talk. I'm using Dash myself at work, and one question is: do you have any experience with custom design? I think you mentioned quickly CSS, but maybe you have a Bootstrap template or something you want to apply. Have you worked with that, and what is your experience?
Yes, we do. So, as an example, actually, of the this isn't really the design, but example of how we kind of use our internal sort of framework. Often you find that you don't want to have a Dash application that has just one graph or one display or something like that. And so, we try and take the design decisions away from, people doing the data science as much as possible and style everything using kind of consistent CSS. But one of the good things that good practices we try and develop is because we have, we have a framework that essentially you use a decorator to say, this is my layout, this is my callback, and then we kind of assemble a Dash application under the hood. It means that we can actually do things like implementing routing and navigation and that kind of stuff, without the data scientist having to worry about that. And so here, for example, I've got the same component repeated twice, that's being built. He says, and there we go. Yeah. And that's kind of being repeated twice and handled by our framework. And then we have internal CSS tooling that creates banners and sort of corporate identities and stuff. So yeah, manage it with CSS, but also abstract out your scripts, I would say, to make it more repeatable.
We're using Dash as well. You have talked about rapid development. Do you have any experience using this in a more production environment? I mean, we've had quite a few problems with Flash being embedded in Dash and not the other way around, especially around deployment. Is that something you can comment about?
Yes, it can be a real pain, for example, if you want to have an API plus a user interface and maybe some Swagger documentation all living on the same Flask application. It is a real pain. And the way that we kind of solve that is that we don't, we wouldn't necessarily use Dash in something that we would consider to be like a proper production environment, say aboard like a destroyer or something. We really keep this to like our proof of concepts and kind of our alphas as a sort of a development tool. And then as we want to build something that's a bit bigger or more involved, we have kind of front end engineers that would start to take that over. So yeah, we use this for rapid templating and or prototyping and sort of building proof of concepts, alphas, rather than betas or actual kind of proper products that we would deploy. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very insightful. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions anymore. So please feel free to approach Dom maybe here or in the foyer later. Let's give an applause to our speaker today.
Thank you very much.